One of the things that we've discussed often on this show is this whole idea that if Trump hadn't gone through what he had to go through, that we wouldn't actually be in a position to be undergoing, the potential for real structural change, the kind that just wouldn't have been possible if he'd actually won the 2020 election. In other words, this idea that the loss in 2020, while it was incredibly painful, may actually have been a huge blessing in disguise. And now with the LA fires, it kind of brings us to a new question. Have we reached a point where a sort of destabilizing tipping point where Democrats have reached a point of getting so bad that they actually fall apart? In other words, how much damage has this fire in LA done to one of the kind of hallmarks of Democrat politics, California at large and LA in particular?
There's so many examples of that which can only really be summed up as incompetence. Now, some might argue that some of this is on purpose, and certainly some of Obama's actions were very much on purpose. Biden, of course, didn't really know what he was doing. But I mean, if we just look at all the things that have been just exposed, and let's just keep calling it incompetence, and with a little sort of footnote that, yeah, maybe some of these things are on purpose, but generally, let's just call it incompetence. Look at inflation. What happened there? I mean, Trump was out the other day kind of looking back at what won him the election. And of course, he talked about the lawfare, but he also talked about things like the massive inflation, as well as the massive uncontrolled immigration as well. That those are things, and this gets right to the heart of the point, where people, just ordinary people, realize these guys have no clue what they're doing, and they're just messing everything up. And of course, as you mentioned, the fires are a much more specific example of that. But in that way, it's actually quite a useful example, because it's such simple things like what they did with the fire services, where everything was suddenly made DEI. That's just complete incompetence tied in or originating from just a messed up mind, where their minds are completely screwed with all the wokeness and so on. And we're seeing the results all over the map. And I agree with you. We're almost at this point, it's sort of a pinnacle point where everything comes together. It's all happening at the same time. And I've heard so many people recently, people have nothing to do with politics usually, or you're just not really interested in whatever, just saying, well, these guys have no clue what they're doing. It's like that kid who realizes that the grown-ups who always pretend that they're in charge or whatever don't really know what they're doing. And it feels like we've reached that point.
I think I kind of approach it from two different angles. One is this cumulative effect that you kind of don't notice things, you don't notice things. Things are incremental. Things get a little bit worse, but at some point it builds up to such a level and it starts to get exposed that you again hit that kind of proverbial tipping point. But it usually takes a catalyst, and in this case, that may be the fire. But there's another example of that as well. It's the idea that, for people in the middle, they're the ones that are probably, they hit a certain point where too many things have piled up, and there's too much going wrong, and, it's inflation, and the fact that eggs are $11 in the supermarket again, things like that. They start paying attention to the level of national debt. But the left is a little bit different. I don't think that they have been willing to change simply because they generally haven't been that impacted by the policies. And it's finally that we've reached a point where they are starting to be impacted by the policies. And again, the fire in LA is sort of epitomizes that, because it's hitting at the heart of the left. Hollywood, Pacific Palisades, LA in general. And you're seeing all these politicians being exposed, all the things that we've been screaming about. The idea that, hey, a fire was committed. Trump did it himself. He's on Rogan, explaining what the issue was going to be with forest fire. Everybody just goes, yeah. And it's just their hatred of Trump overrides the words that he's saying. But now it's happened. And all of a sudden, things have been cemented in concrete. And everybody on the left, in terms of being in LA, is impacted by this directly. So suddenly that perception shifts. And when you've got those two forces coming together, that you've got the middle, and then you've actually got folks on the left that are suddenly starting to notice for the first time, only because the policies are impacting them directly, then maybe we've hit that point where there actually could be some action here.
And you have the contrast with competence. So you look at GOP states, which are competently run. Florida had two massive hurricanes in the run up to the election. Now, if it had been a Democrat-run state, and certainly run by someone like Newsom, they'd still be tidying up, and well, it would have been a complete mess. They might not have been able to run the election. And Florida, because it's competently run, just they were prepared ahead of time. They sent out the linemen. They sent everything was already locked and loaded and good to go. And then once the hurricane hit, the cleanup started right away. And unfortunately, I think some are still thinking, oh, this is climate change or whatever, as if climate change had something to do with the
Not
fire
filling up
services
the
not being
reservoirs and
all that kind of stuff. But even on that front, I mean, when Katrina hit, New Orleans, or all these things you can think of over the past few decades, it was always the same climate change, right? This time, yeah, you have that as well, but I don't think it's as strong, and the pushback is much, much stronger. And the people pointing out that, no, this is just a stupid excuse. What this is incompetence. You've had these fires in LA again and again. It's not like something new. Now, irrespective of whether it was arson or not, or a combination or whatever, some of it certainly was arson, it's a problem. So you got to address the problem ahead of time. You've had the problem before many, many times, and they just didn't do that. And so I think, for once, maybe we're really turning a corner here in terms of that climate change, that magic, word that you put out there, and then suddenly everything is absolved. So suddenly everything is the fault of the SUV, is not as powerful anymore as it used to be.
No, that narrative seems to be continually getting pushed back with greater and greater strength. Thank God. But again, this comes. The left enjoys supporting people and promoting groups, and they get caught up and not realizing that it's actually a division tactic. That it's really a Marxist tactic to divide by groups. But it's one thing to say, "Oh, isn't that great? We have a lesbian-led fire department. Oh, isn't that wonderful?" And they all pat themselves on the back. And it's entirely another thing after a devastating fire to hear the deputy fire chief, probably number fourth in the hierarchy, saying, well, if, I can't carry you out of the house, I can't carry a man out of the house, but if they got themselves into that position in the event of a fire, that's their fault anyway. And all of a sudden people are saying, whoa, wait a minute. That's not what I thought. And the only reason that attention is happening again is because for the first time they're coming face to face with the repercussions of their policies. And that's kind of what's different this time around. It just seems to be this cascading effect, building one upon the other. Again, with Trump, look at what Trump did in California. It was amazing the amount of votes that he got. I don't remember the final tally, but I think it was something like 40% of the California vote. It was, the number of counties that were red in voting for Trump in California was astonishing. Huge sea change. So there's a lot of people that are recognizing it. And one of the things that we've always talked about, like with the deep state and with the left, et cetera, is that they always push too far. They always kind of go too far, and they keep crossing lines and keep crossing lines. And I think because nobody's ever stopped them from crossing a line, they just keep going and they think there's never going to be a problem. And then all of a sudden you have a calamitous effect where all of those lines that have been crossed suddenly pile up and crash upon themselves. And I kind of feel like that's where we might be right now.
And they're still fighting yesterday's wars in terms of cultural, because the right has moved on. No one cares about the background or ethnic or sexual, whatever, in terms of firefighters or doctors, or all these hoaxes that they keep pushing, or all these false narratives they keep pushing. No one on the right cares about these things as long as the job gets done. So let the firefighter be lesbian. Who cares? As long as she can do the job, right?
As long as she
That's
can do,
really
yeah.
all that matters. And I don't think they've kind of they think they haven't realized that yet. They haven't realized that the right has moved way, way, way on from all of those. I mean, it's not yesterday; it's like decades ago. You know, where those might have been kind of cultural war issues, and they're still harping on about these things. And
Well, but far more importantly, more crucially, they haven't recognized that elements of their own party have moved on.
yeah,
That's really the important element here. They're not understanding that, or they just don't know another way. But you and I, we've talked a number of times about there's this dissension that's been going on. We believe that's been going on in the background of the DNC, and this push and pull and tug and a fight for kind of the heart and soul of the Democrat Party. And I think that's kind of what we're watching right now. And maybe kind of the new blood that realizes they have to fix the DNC is starting to win. And this certainly helps them.
and of course Fetterman. I mean, he's the first Democrat senator to go to Mar-a-Lago and to meet Trump. And I'm not gonna suddenly, say that he's suddenly turned conservative or whatever. That he hasn't, but he's turned pragmatic. He understands that these old policies don't work, and maybe he'll set off these kind of dominoes. Right now, there's still, by they, I mean, other Democrats in Congress are unhappy with him for doing what he's doing, the parts of the media, but there is certainly it is evidence that there's this shift. And you know what you said a few moments ago, you're absolutely right. It's not so much that the right has moved on; it's that their own voters have moved on. That's the biggest problem for Democrats right now.
Yeah, I think, like for Fetterman, yes, he knows he's in a Trump state, right? But I do think that it honestly goes beyond that. My guess is that he really believes that his party is sort of fatally flawed if they continue as they are, and that they have to adapt and shift. And he's part of that movement to try to get them to do that. So I think it goes beyond just trying to protect his seat, but rather recognizing that the Democrat Party may just be done for if they don't adapt kind of quickly. And it'll be interesting to see how they do that. But the amount of voices from the left calling out, they can just see the incompetence. They can see Gavin Newsom. There was a great clip where a lady had just had her daughter's house had burned down, and they're standing in front of a school where I guess her daughter's children went to the school. Anyway, Newsom's there. She goes running up to Gavin Newsom and is saying, "What are you going to do? What are you going to do?" And he says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm on with the president right now." And then she says, "Great, I want to hear it." And he says, "Oh, well, actually, I couldn't get him. I've been trying to blah, blah, blah." He just fell apart and was making just, slippery Gavin Newsom excuses. And the world could see that. Everybody could see. There was another instance where the news, they were talking about this issue with running out of water. And you had these anchors saying, well, trying to run cover and saying, well, we don't have any reports of firefighters running out of water. And then they cut to their own reporter, and the reporter's standing there with the firemen and the fire burning behind her saying, the firemen don't have any water. And it's that kind of thing that just crushes, kind of this veneer of competency that they've had. It just falls apart. And they're kind of seeing it all at once. It's getting, at least as far as the LA fires go, it's getting exposed kind of across the board. And this recognition that it's not one failure, but it's failures in terms of not taking care of the forest, not clearing the brush. It's failures in terms of not adequately apportioning water and restricting water, and not, California passed a bill and a bond back in 2014 to build reservoirs. Not one reservoir is built. More than 10 years later, people are starting to wake up to that. Like, wait a minute, why are we paying taxes? What's our money going for? So, seeing the incompetence basically being revealed across the board, I think is really eye-opening, especially when it's hitting you personally as opposed to somebody else. And that's the difference this time around.
It is. And there's another little part of this, which is, of course, Mayor Karen, who,
Oh, God.
again, the U.S. media is just absolutely horrible in every possible way. In this instance, I don't even know whether it was on purpose or not, but no one Mayor Karen was in Ghana. Now, why on earth is a mayor not in her city? I mean, I can understand why, the Secretary of State might want to travel to some foreign countries or whatever, but if you're the mayor, you are supposed to be in your city and spend like 99% of your time there unless it's something, hugely important. Anyway, she was in Ghana, which in and of itself, it was kind of symbolic of all that's broken here. We haven't even talked about how she got to be mayor in the first place, but which is another horrible story, to do with Democrat politics, DEI, all that kind of stuff. But U.S. media, to come back to that point, didn't occur to them to try and get someone on her plane coming back, which is what a UK outlet did. So they had a reporter there, and that reporter then asked her on the bridge going to the airplane or coming out of the airplane, whichever it was, hey, what can you, why were you in Ghana? And what have you got to say about your city burning down? And she just stood there silent. Was it 2 minutes, 3 minutes, something like that? It was just.
Yeah, it was about 2.5 minutes.
Apart from all the usual, this is terrible, she's an embarrassment, all that kind of stuff. In the moment of what we're talking about right here, that sort of incompetency on display for the world to see, it was sort of the perfect depiction of that. She had nothing. She just stood there.
God only knows what she was thinking, other than probably pure panic. I actually have a tweet on that with that interview pinned on my X page. And what I wrote here, this might be one of the greatest takedowns of LA Mayor Karen Bass that I've ever seen. No response, not one word, just blank, blinking panic. And that's exactly what it was. She didn't say a single word, nothing. Just looked into the distance. You could frozen, a deer in headlights, and everybody saw that. And the follow-up news conferences, she had a couple of them. She kind of blew those too, although they were much better than this. But it doesn't matter. More people saw those 2.5 minutes than saw any of her follow-on press conferences. And when you start accumulating that effect, and you see Gavin Newsom trying to cast blame everywhere, despite the fact that people are like, wait a minute. There's no water, okay? This isn't climate change. This isn't, there's just hard facts are suddenly coming face to face with, the false narratives that Democrats are promoting. They don't know what to do about that. They don't have any real answer.
They don't. And this kind of brings me to ask something we've been asking for at least the past year, which is, what's the plan? Remember how we were on this show, some months ago, and asking, surely they're not going to let Trump just walk back into the White House. There's got to be something, right? And then that something kind of never happened. And I haven't quite sort of been able to let go of that. I still keep asking myself, well, what are they going to do? They're going to do something. They can't just let Trump, especially with Trump 47, the second term being all about streamlining government and the whole Doge thing and all of those big structural changes, which haven't happened in generations, and certainly did not happen during Trump's first term for various reasons, Russiagate and all these other hoaxes that they pulled. But it looks like it's going to happen, and so I keep asking myself, well, they can't allow that. What are they going to do? And I'm beginning to think maybe, just maybe, they're okay with Trump just fixing things because they've destroyed things so badly and they've ruined everything so badly that they don't know what to do. They're just at a dead end. They just don't know. So it's like, pass it over to the competent guy for a little while, let him fix stuff, and then we'll take over again and we can ruin stuff again. And, I always think back to, this is something similar to that happened in New York. I mean, New York is like New York City, right? It was just unfathomable that a Republican could ever be mayor. That just wasn't happening. But then Democrats ruined that city. I remember as a kid being there in the like 80s, and I was like, oh, you can't, parents were saying you can't go anywhere, you can't step out, you can't do this, you can't do that, Well, that's just very anecdotal, but I mean, you just look at the statistics and so on. It was terrible. They had absolutely ruined that city. And they ruined it so badly that it was a dead end. There was nothing else they could do. They had no more answers. They had no more plans. They couldn't even articulate anything. They couldn't even make it up. It was just finished. So Giuliani came in and he had to fix it. And what happened is he fixed it. He made it great again. Bloomberg, to a large extent, just continued doing what he did under kind of this Democrat label or independent label, whatever. I think he started off as Republican, and then he kind of adjusted that over time. And now they've ruined it again. So it's like this cycle we're going through. So maybe they just don't know what to do, and they're quite happy just to hand it over for a little while for it to be fixed.
I hope you're right. I'm a little less sanguine. I sort of separate the failures of the DNC from what I think of as the establishment / deep state. And I'm not saying that was your position either. But just because the DNC is undergoing immense stress and struggles at the moment, I don't know that changes a pushback from the establishment / deep state, because Trump is literally an existential threat. If he gets done, half, even a third of what he wants to get done, that is a complete overhaul, a complete restructuring, a complete realignment of everything that Washington wants to propagate. And I have been feeling, had this feeling of deep unsettlement for the last, I don't say month or so. So much weirdness going on. I can't quite place my finger on it. There's been a series of differing events and their own strangeness, the terrorist attack, Vegas, et cetera, now the fires. I just can't see that the larger powers that be that live off of the way that our government is currently run are going to be willing to just simply kind of give it up and say, okay, because Trump comes in. Because if Trump comes in and is able to do what he wants to do, it's not 4 years. It's not a short period of time. It's a fundamental realignment of how government is done, getting us back to basics. And I just really struggle to see them willing to just kind of roll over and allow that to be. It kind of seems like that's what's happening right now, but I'm waiting for the next shoe to drop.
Maybe it's a sort of a mix of those two, where they're okay with him coming in and fixing things, but they're going to fight him on the extent to which the fixing can take place. So they're going to try and preserve. They're going to try and kill off this whole Doge thing. That's probably the biggest threat to them. And they're going to try and preserve the status quo as much as possible, but within certain margins and certain boundaries, allow Trump to at least start fixing things. I mean, one thing that I think they do want him to fix, even though they won't admit this on, in public, is Ukraine. They messed that up. They messed that whole situation up. So I think he will. But domestically, I completely agree with you. It's highly unlikely that they would, even if they think, okay, well, let him do his thing, let him fix stuff a bit so that we can come in again.
Well, you have to understand, though, that there's two diametrically opposed plans, and I'm thinking of the debt right now. So before the issue, the way that really all of the establishment was, and I'm talking about Republicans too, the way that they were approaching the debt problem was that they were going to inflate their way out of it. And that was basically how they were going to handle it. All of a sudden, you have Trump coming in. He's coming from the other side of the angle. And he's saying, no, we're not going to inflate our way out of it. We're going to cut costs like crazy. We're going to do sort of the opposite of what you want. And those are two really diametrically opposing approaches that have huge costs for people. I mean, you're talking about the idea of trying to extract $2 trillion out of our budget. I mean, it's easy to kind of say the words. It's another thing to really, when you picture those numbers scrolling across our screen, it is a gargantuan shift. And so when I see things like that, where you have one approach, as to how they wanted to handle the debt problem versus how Trump wants to handle the debt problem, those two things are in such great conflict that I struggle to see them just accepting that. And maybe you're right that, it is a compromise, and that what they try to do is try to allow him to fix things where it's helpful and try and fight him like crazy where they can. And I agree with you. I mean, Doge is enemy number one right now. Nothing I think even comes close to the threat that Doge represents. Because if you're if you're extracting those kind of costs, it's a loss of power, and they're continually back on their heels, maybe to the point where they can't recover from that. And that's been something, frankly, that you and I have been arguing. We keep saying, move quickly and break things. Put these guys back on their heels and don't let up. Keep hitting them while they're in the corner.
Although most of what we've just discussed these past 5-10 minutes is to an extent speculation, there is one part that is certainly not speculation, which is that Democrats right now are completely rudderless. Mm-hmm. There is no leader, there is no anything. They're just completely all over the place, not really sure what to do. You had Obama the other day being friendly with Trump. When was that
Not
ever?
Just friendly, giggling like a little schoolgirl.
They're all over the map right now. That is for sure. And irrespective of our other sort of ideas about what might be going on this or that or whatever, that is a fact. And that means there's an opportunity. And we've said this many times on this show. Move fast and break things right from day one. There's no time. There's no let's wait for 100 days and settle in and so on, because eventually they'll get their back on their feet. Eventually,
each day you're not doing something is a day that they're regrouping.
100%, yeah.
So, one of the things that was kind of interesting that happened, you mentioned that meeting. Notice, I think it's pretty safe to say that Kamala's career is pretty much toast. When during the funeral for Jimmy Carter, she was just left out. I mean, ignored. It was humiliating, frankly. My best guess is that we're going to see, a new leader always arises. My best guess is it's going to be somebody kind of like Fetterman from that part of the party that's going to rise up and become the new leader of the party. And if that happens, of course, then that plays back into the aspect of what we're talking about, that it's a retrenchment completely away from the progressive policies. It's a new Democratic Party if that type of a leader emerges. So it's a chance for a lot of good things. Will they let it happen?
Kamala it was a very symbolic moment during that. I know they were there for Jimmy Carter's funeral, but all the focus was on all those people, vice presidents and presidents, all sitting together with their spouses. And
except for Michelle Obama,
she didn't for whatever reason she didn't want to go. There was this one moment where Kamala, who is sat in the front row because she's sitting vice president. And so Biden and Kamala and their spouses were in the front row. And then the second row was for the former presidents. And then the third row was for the former vice presidents, Gore and so on, Pence. Cheney wasn't there. Anyway, when Kamala, and this is just, well, let's put this up here. Let's put up a screenshot here. When Kamala heard that, she heard Obama's voice talking to Trump. You could see exactly what was going on. Like, she's sitting in front and suddenly she hears those two guys talking. And that must have been a complete, doesn't compute what on earth is going on here. And then she turns around and looks at them. And in particular, looks at Obama with this completely shocked face, and then turns back and you just can't believe it. And I think that was kind of, you said the end, she's finished. And I think that moment kind of encapsulated the fact that she is in fact finished.
And it was even worse than that, because she was basically reacting to Obama's voice, as in like he's talking to me, turns around to engage in conversation, and Obama's talking to Trump, and then Trump responds, and it just, nobody even looks her way. She's, that whole element is done. And symbolism matters. Those kind of things, that is symbolic of what's happening to the Democrat Party right now, is that wing, that extreme wing, that DEI wing, that progressive wing, which I've always said has been an anchor around the neck of the Democrat Party, is on the outs. And you saw that symbolically at the funeral. And it was. Have you ever watched a funeral? I mean, we have these presidential events, and there's only like 12 people, right, in terms of the presidents. Have you ever seen so many different little items of note throughout a ceremony as that presented? I just was staggered.
There was so much going on. George W. Bush ignoring Trump,
Yep.
but he did the hand thing to Obama. Just sort of tapped him on the tummy, or like boom, a typical George W. Bush move. Laura Bush kind of snickered a bit about the fact that Kamala was upset that Trump and Obama were talking. Karen Pence turned away and completely tried to ignore Trump. Not only like ignored him, didn't get up, didn't shake his hand, none of those things, just literally turned away.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there was so much going on, and so much of it was symbolic for the exact things we're talking about. This sort of tug of war within the Democrat Party between, well, we got to do something. We got to, be more pragmatic on the one side, and on the other side, no, we're progressives. We can't let go. We got to fight this guy, and that was all kind of encapsulated there. It was pretty beautiful in many ways.
And it was pragmatic from the aspect that here you have Obama, who just 3 weeks, 4 weeks ago was telling everybody that Trump is Hitler in the days before the election. And here you have him on a practical basis laughing and engaging with the man who he said was an existential threat to all of America. He's the dictator from hell. And here he is sitting there laughing with him. So you had those two juxtaposing positions, and we know which, everybody could see it. Like, wait a minute, the guy that you were telling us was Hitler and should be demonized by everybody is the same guy that, so you didn't really mean all those things? It was just theater? Yeah, it was just theater.
He also looked a lot better than he did on the campaign trail.
He actually did.
Health-wise.
Yeah.
Maybe, he's a smart guy. Whatever you say about him, he's a very smart guy. Maybe he understands. Well, I'm pretty sure he understands that his 12 years are over. It's over, or actually 16 years. If we've had a show on this where do the 4 years of Trump count as Obama years or not? I think we ended up saying kind of a mixed result. Some of it certainly does with all his holdovers and so on, and all the sabotage that he caused. But he's had a long run. But obviously, with Trump's reelection, that run came to an end, and he understands that. And he's smart enough to make the pivot. And what happened there at Jimmy Carter's funeral was a perfect example of. Well, it just illustrated the pivot. Whereas others like Kamala, who've been, just fed, she's like this little robot, not a very competent one. He's fed lines, fed things to say, and it doesn't compute. It's like, why is he suddenly talking to this guy? No, just she can't pivot. She can't,
That whole thing showed how small and useless she is. Maybe Obama's doing better because Michelle is still in Hawaii.
Maybe, but I would never trust the guy, as far as I could throw him. But he's a smart guy, and he's going to make some. No, I'm not sure if he's going to make a comeback of some kind, but he's going to try, and he's certainly going to be able to regain control of something within the Democrat Party, because right now is kind of he's pretty much done for. They're going to have a turf war, as we said, between the progressives and the pragmatic ones. And Obama seems to, my guess is that he would go with the pragmatic ones, which is, by the way, what he did in 2008. That's how he sold himself during that election. He was all for all the things that conservatives liked, and he hid the progressive side. So I think we're seeing that Obama again, the 2008 version.
Yeah, I still think the larger question is going to be is what does the establishment / deep state behind the scenes, how do those folks react? Because right now the DNC's kind of been neutered. They're going through, as we've been talking about, this upheaval, trying to find a new direction, a new path. What's going to happen at the intelligence agencies? What's going to happen in the depths of all of the federal agencies? Because remember, those people are quite literally facing extinction. In terms of some of those agencies, they are talking about absolutely slashing careers ended, and so much so that they may not all be able to get jobs. This isn't going to be just a simple thing. So for those people, this is potentially truly an existential threat, and that's the part that really has me, I guess, fascinated, but also really worried as to what they may or may not do.
Well, maybe we'll close it out here on something we've already said on this show, we've said on previous shows, but it's just so important. It just bears repeating. The most important thing of all is come January 20th, move quickly and break things. Don't waste a single second.